Banks don't care if you retire comfortably. They don't care if you can afford groceries in 10 years. They care about one thing: whether you'll make the mortgage payment. And that's exactly why their approval number is designed to work for them, not for you. So let's run the real math, because the number that should scare you isn't the one the bank gives you. It's the one they don't. Today we're going to take three salaries: $60,000, $100,000, and $175,000, and show you exactly what the bank will approve, what the rules say you should spend, and what actually happens to your money either way. The results are not what you'd expect. And before anyone says it, yes, these numbers will look different depending on where you live. We'll get to that. But we're starting with the national picture because the math works the same way whether you're in Indianapolis or Austin. The trap just costs more in some cities than others. Here's what the bank never factors in when they hand you that approval number. First, there's PMI, private mortgage insurance. If you put down less than 20%, your lender charges you a monthly fee that protects them, not you. In 2026, that typically runs between 0.5 and 1.5% of your loan amount per year. On a $320,000 loan, that's roughly $210 every single month. Money that builds zero equity and disappears the moment you miss the 20% threshold. Second, property taxes. These aren't fixed. They're recalculated annually based on your home's assessed value, and in many markets they've climbed alongside home prices. Nationally, the average effective rate sits around 1.1% of home value per year. But in states like Texas or New Jersey, it's closer to 2%. Third, insurance. Your lender requires it, and it's not cheap. Homeowners insurance on a median-priced home typically runs between $1,200 and $2,000 per year. And in storm-prone states, it's climbing fast. Fourth, repairs. A common rule of thumb is to budget 1% of your home's value annually. On a $400,000 home, that's $4,000 a year sitting in a maintenance reserve. The water heater doesn't care about your budget. And fifth, the one nobody talks about, opportunity cost. Every dollar you tie up in a down payment is a dollar not invested. At a 6 to 7% average annual return in the market, a $60,000 down payment has a real cost beyond the check you wrote. That doesn't make buying wrong, but it makes the math bigger than the mortgage statement. The bank calculated none of that. They ran one number, your debt-to-income ratio, and then they handed you an approval letter. There are two rules most lenders and personal finance guides lean on. The first is the 2836 rule. It says your monthly mortgage payment, including principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, should not exceed 28% of your gross monthly income, and your total debt load, including car payments, student loans, and credit cards, should stay under 36%. The second is the 3033 rule. 30% of your gross income toward total housing costs. 30% of the home's purchase price saved in cash before you buy. 20 for the down payment. 10 as a maintenance and emergency buffer. And the home should cost no more than 3 times your annual income. Both rules were built for a reason. They exist to make sure that after the mortgage is paid, you still have a financial life. The problem is, in 2026, following them perfectly is nearly impossible for most buyers, and almost nobody tells you what happens when you don't. Meet Ryan. He earns $60,000 a year. He's been renting, watching home prices, and saving for a few years. He wants in. Under the 2836 rule, Ryan's maximum monthly mortgage payment works out to $1,400. With today's 30-year fixed rate at 6.4% and a 10% down payment, that payment gets him a home in the $185,000 range. The national median home price right now is $404,000. Ryan is looking at less than half of a median home. So Ryan does what a lot of buyers at his income level do. He stretches. He finds a $250,000 home, below median, modest by any measure, puts 10% down, and signs the papers. Here's what his actual monthly picture looks like. His principal and interest payment on a $225,000 loan at 6.4% is $1,406. Property taxes at 1.1% add another $229 per month. Homeowner's insurance adds around $130. And because he put down less than 20%, PMI adds $150 per month on top of that. His real all in housing cost, $1,915 per month. That's 38% of his gross income, 10 percentage points above the 2836 rules ceiling before a single other bill is paid. After taxes, Ryan takes home roughly $3,900 a month. After housing, he has $2,000 left for food, transportation, utilities, student loans, car insurance, and everything else. There is no investing happening. There is no emergency fund growing. There is no retirement contribution beyond whatever his employer matches. Ryan owns a home, and Ryan is one broken furnace away from a crisis. The PMI alone, that $150 a month, will cost Ryan over $11,000 before he reaches 20% equity, assuming modest appreciation. That's $11,000 paid to protect his lender, not him. Now meet Maya. She earns $100,000 a year. By most measures, she's doing well, and her bank agrees. Under the 2836 rule, Maya qualifies for a monthly payment of up to $2,333. At 6.4% with 20% down, that buys her a home in the $360,000 range. Still below the national median, but competitive in many markets outside the coasts. Her bank, however, doesn't just offer her $360,000. They look at her clean credit, her stable income, her no car payment situation, and they approve her for $475,000. They explain she can absolutely handle the payment. They're right, technically, she can make it. Maya buys at $400,000, puts 20% down, and feels responsible about it. Her loan is $320,000. At 6.4% over 30 years, her principal and interest payment is $2,000 per month. Property taxes add $367. Insurance adds $140. No PMI because she hit 20%. Total monthly housing cost, $2,507. That's 30% of her gross income, right at the edge of the 3033 rules ceiling. Here's the problem. Maya's take-home after taxes is roughly $6,300 a month. After housing, she has $3,793. That sounds fine. But run the real numbers. Transportation, groceries, utilities, phone, health insurance premiums out of pocket, she's realistically sitting on $1,000 to $1,500 per month of genuine discretionary cash. She's not investing 15% of her income for retirement. She's not building a 6-month emergency fund. She's treading water in a house that looks like financial success from the outside. And the 3033 rule's second 30? The cash buffer? Maya put 20% down. $80,000. She did not keep another 10%, $40,000 on the sidelines. 6 months after closing, the HVAC system fails. The repair is $8,000. Maya puts it on a credit card. The compound interest on that card will cost her more than the repair itself. The bank approved her. The math checked out. The system worked exactly as designed for the bank. Now meet Derek. He earns $175,000 a year. He's followed the rules his whole financial life. Good saver, no bad debt, maxes his 401k. He's ready to buy. The 3033 rule says his home should cost no more than 3 times his annual income, $525,000. His monthly payment ceiling under the 2836 rule is $4,083. At 6.4% with 20% down, that buys him a home around $630,000. The math, for once, seems workable. But Derek lives in a city, not San Francisco, not Manhattan. Austin, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, Denver, Colorado. Cities that a decade ago were affordable and are now anything but. The median home in Denver right now sits above $550,000. In Austin, it's similar. In Nashville, prices have climbed past $500,000 in desirable zip codes. Derek follows the rules perfectly. He buys a $500,000 home with 20% down. a $100,000 down payment. His loan is $400,000. Principal and interest at 6.4%, $2,507 per month. Property taxes in Texas at 1.8%, $750 per month. Insurance, $160. No PMI. Monthly housing cost, $3,417. That's 23% of his gross income. Well within the rule. Derek looks fine on paper, but that $100,000 down payment under the 3033 rule's second 30, he should have kept another $50,000 in cash reserves. Instead, he kept $20,000. He wanted to get in before prices climbed further. 3 years later, the roof needs replacing, $40,000. Derek refinances to pull equity. His monthly payment goes up. His timeline to payoff extends. The house he bought to build wealth is now a vehicle for more debt, and the opportunity cost of that $100,000 down payment, had it stayed invested at a 7% average annual return, would have been worth nearly $200,000 in 10 years. That's not a reason not to buy, but it is a number your bank will never put in front of you. So what number should you actually be calculating before you buy? Not what the bank approves, not even what the rules suggest. The number that matters is this. After your total monthly housing costs, mortgage, taxes, insurance, PMI, if applicable, and a realistic maintenance reserve, how much is left and is it enough to keep building wealth? Professor Wealth calls this your wealth building margin. It's the money left after housing that goes toward retirement, emergency savings, and investments. If buying a home reduces that margin to zero, or worse, creates new debt, the bank's approval letter is not permission. It's a trap with your signature on it. A rough target. Your total housing costs should leave you with at least 15 to 20% of your take-home pay available for wealth building. Not 10, not 5, 15 to 20. If the math doesn't get you there, you have 3 options. Buy less house, wait and save more, or move to a market where the numbers work. None of those options are comfortable, but neither is spending your 40s realizing that the house you bought in your 30s is the reason you can't retire on your terms. The 2836 rule and the 3033 rule aren't wrong. They exist because someone sat down and thought about what buying a home sustainably actually requires. The problem is that in 2026, with a median home price above $400,000 and a 30-year rate at 6.4%, those rules are nearly impossible to follow. And lenders are very happy to approve you anyway. Ryan, Maya, and Derek all bought homes. All 3 followed some version of the conventional wisdom. All 3 are in positions their bank never warned them about. Because the bank's job was never to protect them, it was to collect the payment, run your real number, not the approval, the wealth building margin. That's the number that tells you the truth. If this math landed for you, the next video walks through exactly what the bank's debt-to-income calculation is hiding, and how to use it against them when you negotiate. Professor Wealth will see you there.